by waiting. It usually dried up in August, but now, after the spring floods, it was a river 40 feet in breadth, rapid, muddy and cold, and on the bank, and right up to the water, there were fresh tracks of wheels, so it had been crossed here. "Go on!" shouted Semyon angrily and anxiously, tugging violently at the reins and jerking his elbows as a bird does its wings. "Go on!" The horse went on into the water up to his belly and stopped, but at once went on again with an effort. Marya Vassilyevna was aware of a keen chilliness in her feet. "Go on!" she too shouted, getting up. "Go on!" They got out on the bank. "Nice mess it is, Lord have mercy upon us!" muttered Semyon, setting straight the harness. "It's a perfect plague with this Zemstvo." Her shoes and goloshes were full of water. The lower part of her dress and of her coat and one sleeve were wet and dripping. The sugar and flour had got wet, and that was the worst of all, and Marya Vassilyevna could only clasp her hands in despair and say, "Oh, Semyon, Semyon, how tiresome you are, really!" The barrier was down at the railway crossing. A train was coming out of the station. Marya Vassilyevna stood at the crossing, waiting till it should pass, and shivering all over with cold. Vaizovia was in sight now, and the school with the green roof, and the church with its crosses flashing in the evening sun, and the station windows flashed too, and a pink smoke rose from the engine, and it seemed to her that everything was trembling with cold. Here was the train. The windows reflected the gleaming light like the crosses on the church. It made her eyes ache to look at them. On the little platform between the two first-class carriages a lady was standing, and Marya Vassilyevna glanced at her as she passed. Her mother! What a resemblance! Her mother had had just such luxuriant hair, just such a brow and bend of the head. And with amazing distinctness, for the first time in those 13 years, there rose before her mind a vivid picture of her mother, her father, her brother, their flat in Moscow, the aquarium with little fish, everything to the tiniest detail. She heard the sound of the piano, her father's voice. She felt as she had been then, young, good-looking, well-dressed, in a bright warm room among her own people. A feeling of joy and happiness suddenly came over her. She pressed her hands to her temples in an ecstasy and called, softly, beseechingly, "Mother!" And she began crying. She did not know why. Just at that instant Hanoff drove up with his team of 4 horses, and seeing him, she imagined happiness such as she had never had, and smiled and nodded to him as an equal and a friend, and it seemed to her that her happiness, her triumph, was glowing in the sky and on all sides, in the windows and on the trees. Her father and mother had never died. She had never been a schoolmistress. It was a long, tedious, strange dream, and now she had awakened. "Vassilyevna, get in!" And at once it all vanished. The barrier was slowly raised. Marya Vassilyevna, shivering and numb with cold, got into the cart. The carriage with the 4 horses crossed the railway line. Semyon followed it. The signalman took off his cap. "And here is Vaizovia. Here we are." End of The Schoolmistress,